Yeah, that's all right. That's okay. Did you tell everybody to turn the ringer off on their phone?
No, I didn't.
Yeah.
Should we tell everybody to turn your ringers off on your phone?
We like social media pictures, so. God, packed house. Hi, everybody. My name is Kris, and I am a producer at WSAV. I produce a show called The Bridge, which is a lifestyle show. We do a lot of stories on local artists and things like that. I think it's fitting that Rob's solo exhibit is titled, in part, Worlds Collide, because that's how I met Rob. We have mutual friends, and a couple years ago, they came to me and they said, you have got to do a story on this guy. He has this really cool art exhibit down at the Butcher, and I'm like, sure, we'd like to do stories on all kinds of, cool people. And I walked in, and Rob's drawings just kind of knocked me out. They're serious, but they're light, and it really was one of the first times that I ever saw an artist's exhibit where I didn't want to leave. I was really blown away. And I'm not just saying that because he's sitting right next to me, really. I mean that. So
Sure.
So tonight we're going to get to know Rob and 3 other talented artists, and we'll start the panel discussion because tonight's theme is the impact of art on the community. And then we'll take some questions at the end. Okay, so I'll be thinking of some really good questions. So first of all, we're going to meet our panel. To my left, Dare Duke is the executive director of Deep Center, where they host free writing workshops for local kids. Under Dare's leadership, Deep Center has gone from about 24 kids in 2 local public schools their first year to thousands of kids who have received full scholarships to writing programs. And I've heard some of Dare's kids, and they are wise beyond their years. They're talented. Some of you have on your chair, you have a poem. It's a long-form poem that I was reading earlier. It's just amazing when you think how young the person is who wrote it. So, okay, we've got Dare right here. Nichole Rawlings. Nichole was appointed to Brenau University. Did I get it right? I've been practicing that all day. She's director of galleries and custodian of the permanent art collection. That was in 2014. She's been the office manager of performing arts and art gallery support in Brenau's College of Fine Arts and Humanities. Get some good information from her. Clay Hodges, just a baby. I love that. 24 years old, hip hop artist. We can be so proud of him. He's an active member of the community and uses his talents to help others, which, young person, that's a really good thing. He has held benefit concerts to provide Christmas presents for the children of Greenbrier Children's Center and to give relief to those affected by Hurricane Matthew. He works with youth and advocates for art being used to help strengthen the community. And there's Rob. Rob Hessler, an artist and activist here in Savannah. Many of you know him. He divides his time between drawing, advocating for social and environmental causes to various city officials and boards, and he co-chairs his neighborhood association. So we're going to talk about his art today, too. So, all right, let's get started. So we're going to start with some panel questions for everyone tonight. And I think this is a good way to start. I want to ask everybody, I know you're passionate about your art, but what are you passionate about personally, and how do those passions influence your art? So, Dare, you want to go first?
What am I passionate about personally? Well, I mean, at the moment, really, it's hard for me to separate what I'm passionate about personally with the kind of dangerous spectacle that we're living in at the moment. And I think we live in a moment in history that requires us to make bold choices in support of truth and fairness and protecting the most vulnerable populations among us. And I think that art and cultural practices are one of the most effective and powerful ways to get people to come together, to have hard conversations, and to work for truth and fairness and protection of others. So how's that for a succinct explanation?
That's really good. And I'm going to go from Dare, I'm going to go down to Nichole. What about you? What are you personally passionate about, and how does that affect the art that you create?
Well, that's a tough act to follow, Dare, and I think sums up well a lot of what each of us on this panel would hopefully say. So I'll go in a different direction and just comment on the fact that I don't actually make a lot of art personally these days. That was actually what I thought would be my path when I was younger, is I was a studio artist. And then I had this sort of epiphany moment when I was in high school. I was taking AP Art History, which for a high school junior, to me at the time, that was just a way to get my extra quality points towards my GPA. But once I was in that class, it really just turned me on to this other side of my art making. And I was fortunate enough to take a trip to Italy with my high school class. And very long story short, I stumbled upon a piece of art in a church. It wasn't a museum, it wasn't sectioned off, it was just literally a church where people went to every day. And I saw a piece there in person that I had seen in my art history book maybe 2 weeks before. And that moment to me was so profound. And it sort of flipped me from this studio art making side to pursuing a career in art history. And so that's sort of my path towards being the gallery director. And so for me, I think being able to spark some of that interest in our younger generations has been really important to me in my time at the galleries thus far. So really that accessibility, the accessibility of being able to come into a space and see a piece of art and be sort of blown away by this piece of art, and to maybe hopefully spark a little bit of something in someone that they didn't know was there. So taking that sort of moment for me and being able to channel that into hopefully transformative experiences for others.
Rob, I'm going to talk to you next because I have a feeling that that's sort of along the same lines. It's not going to be the same answer, but it's going to be along the same lines because, like I said, I've seen your work and the way you group your pictures together and they tell a story. I can tell where your passions are, but tell everybody about that.
Well, it's really interesting. I hadn't really thought about it before, but when I was putting together this panel, and I'm just sort of thinking about the people that I'm surrounded with right now, is that we're not really separated from, on personal level, from what we're passionate about. Like our jobs are a reflection of what we just believe in. It's like who we are, and then we also happen to work in those fields. I mean, we happen to be active in those fields. So I think it's I was just sort of to dovetail off of what Dare was saying. I mean, I don't really have like hobbies. My hobby is like writing a letter to the alderman. You know what I mean?
I love it. I love it.
I mean, and it's I'm thinking about like what's my plan for next week, and I have like a neighborhood association meeting, and then I have a coffee meeting with Georgia Power to discuss issues that we've been having with our power grid in the neighborhood on Wednesday, and it's that's what I do, and I feel like really passionate about it. And I don't know, it's funny because it's that obviously impacts my art when I'm what I'm doing there, but I also sort of feel like what Dare said, it's like, how can I not care about that stuff now? I mean, it's just it's right. I feel like social activism is just what I'm meant to do at this moment. It's not really like I don't know, maybe when I was younger it was playing video games, and now and like that's what seemed important, and now it just feels like this is what I want to do with my life. So, me and my wife are sitting at home like after work or whatever, and we'll get together and we'll talk about like, well, what's going on? Like what have we seen during the day? Like what are we interacting? Maybe I've gotten some emails from a city official or something like that, and we're discussing like what our response is going to be, what do we need to do for the neighborhood, and that, I mean, so it's hard to, I don't think that there's really a line between life and passion, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Clay, I don't want it to sound like I'm, speaking down to you, because I think you are just wise beyond your years in the short time that I've known you, but you are the youngest member here, and your art is music too. So how does that passion translate into social activism?
Oh, music. It's the voice of the people, man, in my opinion. Like Rob was saying, like as an artist, you have a responsibility, and I feel like me as a hip hop artist have a really big responsibility because of the listeners, and a lot of people that listen to the music are the youngest, and they're really impressionable by what we say, and it's important to like put that positive message out there so that it can help them grow, not destroy them. So that's important. And to answer your question, you said what am I passionate about besides art? It's definitely food. It has to be food. Yeah, shout out to Savannah vegans and veggies on the meatballs. They were busted.
I made those, by the way.
Yeah.
Yes, I did.
So you literally feed your passion. Is
Yes.
that's what you're saying?
I like
You like that? Okay.
Well, I did want to say is, so I was looking, I was sort of doing some research on local hip hop artists, and I was, I kind of did a shout out on Facebook and got a bunch of responses, and I was listening to Clay's music, and I loved his music, and then I went to sort of learn a little bit more about him, and I found out that he was a vegan, and that was, to me, like, that totally blew away part of my conception about what a hip hop artist is, and like, I just love that. I like that, it's like, I want to learn.
Did you
know what I
think
mean?
they were all like Fred Flintstone? Or
I don't even know what I thought. I just was like, this socially conscious vegan hip hop artist in Savannah. Like, I was like, man, how could I not want to reach out to this guy? I mean, that's just.
Yeah, and what you said is real because a lot of people have a misconception about hip hop artists and what we should be or what we should look like. It's just art at the end of the day, man. It's just important to be yourself. Don't put people in boxes, man. Because for me as an artist, like half of the battle of getting support was to work my way out of that box that people put me in.
Well, I'll be honest with you. A couple weeks ago, I met Clay, and he gave me his latest CD, and I was like, "This is great." And then I was like, I got in my car, and I put the CD, and I was like, "Please like it, please like it, please like it, please like." Because I have a kid who's probably not much younger than you. It's beautiful, and I was very pleased that I got what he wanted me to get through his music. It just made me happy. So, all right, we've talked about passions. Now we're going to talk about motivation. I know you guys are very talented and you create things all the time. I mean, Nichole, whether you said you do it as much anymore or anything, but what
different kind of creation?
Yes. What motivates you guys to keep creating? Is it just literally you wake up in the morning and you're like, today I have to do this? Like you said, you and Gretchen will sit there and talk about other things, but then you create. I have to write for a living, and I don't write like some of the kids that Dare sees. I have a deadline, and sometimes looking at that blank page or knowing I've got so much to do, it terrifies me still to this age. So what motivates you guys to keep going and creating? We're just going to go right down the line again. We're going to do this way again. Dare, go ahead.
Well, I should say that I'm also a musician and a writer myself, but I really, at the moment, my work is really deep, and I would say what motivates me with deep is I feel like I'm going to be on the bummer on the panel tonight.
No. Everybody's motivated by different things.
So here I go. So even before the current election, there was a lot of stuff going on in Savannah that was harming young people. 42% of all young people in Savannah grow up poor. 42%. That means if you meet two young people in Savannah, there's a really good chance that one of them is living in poverty. And what Deep knows is what we know is when you help a young person tell their story and tell it well, and you help them publish their work, and you honor them for who they are, that they gain confidence. They get a lot of stuff. They get better at reading and writing, and they tend to. We know this because we measure our young people in our programs, but they tend to get better in all kinds of competencies that help them learn across the curriculum. But what also happens is they gain confidence in who they are and pride in their community, and they learn how to step up and talk back to the structures that are harming their communities. And there's a ton of structures in Savannah that have been around for many generations, here in Savannah and other places, that are harming the young people from low-income communities, principally young people of color from low-income communities in Savannah. So, I see day in and day out that they are the most talked about and the most erased population in Savannah. The mainstream media loves to talk about Savannah's young people, but when they do, it's typically about gun violence, and which is less than 1% of that population. And so there's 99.5% of those kids are only seeing themselves represented that way in the media. And when that happens, they start to internalize those narratives. And I know this because I hear them, and I hear them talk about those narratives. There was the young, I don't know if we all got to go to the White House a couple years back. We got this great honor. It was a lot of fun. And one of our young people went with us, and we were doing kind of mock press interviews with him because we knew he was going to get cameras stuck in his face. And somebody in one of these mock interviews said, "Andre, where would you be if it weren't for DEEP?" And Andre said, "I'd probably be in jail." Oh. And Andre would not have been in jail without DEEP. He didn't mean because I'm black and a man, I'm disproportionately targeted by cops. That's not what he meant. He was parroting a narrative that he hears over and over and over again in the media. And so we called him out on that. And we see that kind of thing happen in DEEP all the time. So a lot of the work is about, when I talk about truth, a lot of the work is about getting young people to really get to where they are and start to see how who they are is not what they're seeing reflected back to them in the media. So that's just one thing.
It's good that you say that and we talk about this, because that is something that we struggle with every day at the TV station. Every morning in the morning meeting, we do that. There's that old adage of it bleeds, it leads, and we try not to. I mean, sometimes you have to just report the news, but that is something that is and it makes me sad sometimes that we have to have that discussion every single day, so now I'm the dad.
Yeah, I'm not like
All right, so Nichole, what motivates you to keep creating?
Well, I think when I think about myself creating, particularly in my current role, it's a little bit different than creating a song or creating an art piece. I'm creating exhibition experiences, I'm creating programming, creating opportunities for our community and particularly for our university students to engage with the art that I'm bringing in. So what motivates me to continue that cycle is really the then interpretations by the students of those particular events. Mm-hmm. So we are a liberal arts college, Brenau University in Gainesville, but we have a very large percentage now, a growing percentage of our students are in the health sciences, nursing, biology, physical therapy, OT. So fields where these students aren't really thinking that the art galleries on campus are relevant to them. So how do we make the art galleries relevant to them? So we work with our faculty a lot to bring the university students into that gallery environment. And we've had students come in and write poetry in response to art pieces. We've had students come in and choreograph dance routines within our space. Last semester we had an exhibition by an artist named Nancy Hellebrand, and her photographs documented journal pages from her mother's journal, and her mother battled with Alzheimer's for many years at the end of her life. And so we were able to bring in the health sciences community, these students and faculty members who we typically don't see at receptions, and they had such engaged, interesting questions for this artist. And so I think for me, again, harking back to that accessibility of making opportunities for students and for people in our larger community who wouldn't come out to an art opening, wouldn't step into a museum or a gallery, wouldn't think that it's relevant to them, and making it relevant to them and making it something that they feel that they can relate to. Because I think that art can be intimidating for people who might not think that they have the tools to understand what it is that they're seeing. And so constantly, fighting that question of how can I make this relevant, and how can I make these students or these community members understand that they have the tools and they can come in and appreciate this. It might just be from a different perspective. So I think it's oftentimes the students' own reactions coming into the gallery and maybe looking a little bit disinterested and leaving with something that they feel proud about, with something that they feel engaged with. So it's that constant cycle, I think, of the accessibility and the relevance, and seeing that it's really having an impact on them and their understanding of what they can understand.
Before I get to you two guys with the same question, I want to go back to Dare, though. Is that like the same, what Nichole's talking about, that look of joy or recognition or something? I can only imagine what that must be like for you the first time you see one of your kids come in there and write something that they know is good or they feel it.
Yeah.
I mean, what is that like for you?
You can see it.
That's got to be a motivator.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, countless examples of young people who, I mean, you know Crystal. So Crystal Sanchez Romero was our Deep Laureate in the winter, and I mean, she was voted by Savannah and her peers as the best kind of young writer in our program, and she is a young Latina woman from East Broad, one of the most challenged schools in, probably the country, definitely the state. And she rose out of this school, and I had known her for a year and had honestly not been paying attention to her because though she was a prolific writer, she was not a very deep writer. And I was sitting in a workshop one day, and she was reading a poem, and this is at the height of, again, the federal actions against immigrants that were happening in February. And I was sitting in this workshop and hearing her read a Where I'm From poem, which is a very common kind of poem that we prompt our young authors to write because it tends to get them to go deep very fast. Just write a poem about where you're from. And she wrote a poem about growing up in Mexico and the beauty and the challenges of growing up in Mexico. And it was astoundingly beautiful, detailed, nuanced work coming out of the mouth of this young woman who told us later that when she came to Deep, she was very emotionally troubled and afraid to speak up in class. And here she was, holding forth in this like poetic and strong way in this class. And she went on to become our Deep Laureate, and was, we talked to her family. Do you want to be visible at this time? Because there's a lot of stuff. There were ICE raids in Savannah in various communities, and they said yes, we do. And she read her poem on stage and got all this attention. Now she's been reading it everywhere in the media. And when you talk to her, she says that Deep changed her life, and now she wants to be an activist. And she's like 14, and, so yeah.
Yeah.
And that's just one example. So.
All right, Rob. I know Rob is like one of the most humble people I've ever met. He's so talented and so kind, and he gives so much. But I mean, when I was talking earlier, did you know that I felt that way when I first saw we did that interview, and you said, but I really. Hearing how I reacted to your art, does that motivate? I'm not talking about just me, I'm talking about anybody when they read or see or whatever, but as an artist, to know that your art affected me like that, how does that motivate you to keep going? Or is it just like you just do it because it's your passion?
Well, I mean, it's actually pretty tough to, I sort of, I struggle with I actually think often about what is the appropriate emotion. I mean, the appropriate motivation to be working from as an artist. And I've spoken with some people here, and some people know that I don't sell my work anymore. For that reason, I didn't like the commercial motivation to do work. And I wonder, and I think about often, like, should I care about what people think about it? Like, what should I care if the viewer is engaged with it, but and I think it's human nature, though. I mean, you say that, and I'm like, that's amazing. I mean, how can I not feel that way? How could I not feel that way? I had and I know I've told you this story before, but it's something that's really stood with me. Is I did this piece, and I did this piece for this exhibition, the one that you saw, and it was of an Edelweiss flower, and it was a symbol for courage. And there was this series that I was doing was these symbols for various attributes, positive attributes for humanity that were drawn as flowers, and then the negative aspects of humanity were drawn as these monsters. And there was these flowers versus these monsters, and one of the flowers was this Edelweiss flower, which signified courage. And I had somebody come up to me that purchased the piece, and she told me about how she had experienced some abuse, and that the piece was going to be a way to remind her to be courageous going out into the world. And I don't even realize that my work can have that kind of effect on someone. I mean, it's like it's when I'm sitting there in a dark room with one light, because I work under a a gallery lighting, because I know it's going to be in a gallery eventually, and so I want it to look like what it's going to look like in the gallery. So it's like all dark around me. I have this one light. I'm by myself. There's nobody around me to critique the work until it goes up basically on the wall. I ignore anything that people say on social media because I just don't believe anything that anybody says to me about my work on social media. And it's like, so to me, it's like I'm in this little hole by myself, and I don't even know that it's like I almost disassociate myself from, wow, that can really have that kind of effect. And you know, it takes you telling that kind of story. It takes that person coming to me and telling me how what that work had, that kind of effect that work had on that person, for me to remember that, you know what, this does have an emotional impact. Because actually my work, when I make it, I'm like thinking of, this is a conversation starter. I want people to talk about this thing, and I think it's important and we should talk about it. That's the point I come from, not, wow, this might really impact somebody, you know, like on a visceral level. And it's a really interesting thing, and I think it's something I need to think more about, to be honest with you. I really
I'll talk
probably
about
do.
it all day long. We'll go right down your pictures. I'll talk about everything you want to
By the way, I am that person. It sits on my desk. Right here, I sit down every day at the desk, and there it is.
I wasn't going to call Bobby out. But yeah,
In the world of television, we call that a moment. It's just like that. In every show, what was the moment? We always thought that will be the moment. Okay, so Clay, you're going to have to follow the moment here. So, now Rob talks about the way he creates his art. And I just thought that was so fascinating that he just said that, because he creates it in the way that he feels it's going to be put out there. Is that how you do it with music? Do you create your music and kind of like just you, or do you put it out there and want people to listen to it before it's done? Is it ever done, kind of thing? What motivates you to create these beautiful songs from the start to finish, kind of thing?
Yes, ma'am. Well, for me, it's my biggest motivation is life. It's like the wave of life, man. It's like the song Savannah Weather that I made. Sometimes it's sunny days, sometimes it's sunny shades, it's raining sometimes. And I just make music based off of how I feel. And I realize that people relate to that. People are affected by that. So I understand that importance. I understand that people are affected by it. So I do take that in mind, especially with creating, but I don't put too much thought into it. I try to make it as organic as possible and just talk about how I feel. And that feeling, though, when people connect with your music or connect with your art or what you're doing, it's magical, man. It definitely gives you motivation to keep going. I had a friend. She's been like trying to commit suicide for like a lot of times. And, you know, I let her hear some of my music, my newer stuff that I didn't put out. It's a song I wrote called Suicide Note. Because when I was dealing with those thoughts, you know, I just expressed it. And she called me one day and she was like, you know, I was really sad. I was really hurt. And I was thinking about killing myself again, but I listened to your song and it made me feel good about myself. And just stuff like that, it just motivates you like to keep going, because like you're really affecting people for the better.
That's awesome.
I know. We do that all the time. We put these little stories out there sometimes, and you'll hear, you know, and like you said, social media, it's the devil sometimes. But your music influences people, your art, your words, your the way you present things. It's amazing sometimes how, you know, one little thing you can do can have like a ripple effect. And so everyone here is very interested in what's going on. I know that's why you're here. So we're going to go down the way we did again, and just what advice do you have for the people here who would like to maybe use something that they create to influence some social change? Is it just do it? Is that what you would say, or is it a little more structured than that?
You always make me go first.
Oh, that's just we could go with Rob if you'd like to.
No, that's all right. I mean, I don't know what to say about that, honestly, because I've really been called to this work, kind of like Rob was saying, and I've met people who've said they struggled to kind of like show up every day for this stuff, and I don't know what to say to them, because I always just have, and I know that you know, no matter how hard it has been, I've just always have, and it's not because I'm making decisions to work hard. It's because I just am really compelled to do it, and And though it's really hard and makes me feel exhausted and I complain about it all the time, and I still am compelled to do it. And just purely as an artist, to me, one of the most important things to be able to do is to sit there with a blank page.
Oh.
And if you can sit there with a blank page when you don't know what you're going to do, or a blank canvas, or an empty gallery, and you don't know what to do, and you can move through those spaces, then I think you'll be fine.
How about you?
Can I just steal his answer?
Yes, yes. That's what I love about these panel discussions is they all sit there like, I'm going to go, how can I use what Nichole says?
I would just, to piggyback off that, say that I don't think there's any one right piece of advice, because nobody's path is the same, nobody's product is the same, nobody's thoughts are the same. And I think you'll always sort of feel like you're not doing enough. But doing something is enough, and doing something, and a lot of people doing something is the only way that we're going to get to doing a big thing. So I mean, that would just be my piece of advice, would just do something. Start with that blank page or the blank walls, and see where you get, and don't judge yourself too harshly if you feel like you're not doing enough, because you are doing something.
I try and take little nuggets out of things when I do panel discussions like this. Doing something is enough. I'm going to remember that. I might have to remember that. So.
Well, yeah. I mean, I just kind of I think what Nichole said is right on. So like, I always wanted to be an activist. I mean, I thought of that. I was like, I want to be the kind of person that actually does stuff. Like, I want to go and I want to try to make the world a better place, and I never did. I mean, I just sat at home. I just bitched on Facebook or on social media. I did nothing. I just always talked about how I talked about how angry I was, and I never actually did anything. And then there was a guy that I knew in my neighborhood. I started going to the neighborhood association meetings. This guy named Steve Vickery, and he was trying to save the Johnny Harris building. And I'm sure many of you guys know about the Johnny Harris building. And he was so passionate about his desire to save that building. And I was like, and it kind of rubbed off on me a little bit. I was like, what, you're right, we should save this building. And it was like, that was the tiny seed that got planted. And then we couldn't save the Johnny Harris building, but then like another project came up, this storage facility project that came up, and then it was like, well, wait a second, well, maybe we're starting a little earlier here, and then I'm at the zoning board meeting, and then I'm at the Metropolitan Planning Commission meeting, and then I'm having, I'm with people from the neighborhood, from Smart Growth Savannah, from these organizations, trying to do something good for Savannah. And it was just that I found one thing that I could do, that I felt like I could be a part of, and I felt passionately about. And I think that's really like, for me, for so long, there was all these issues. It was all this thing where I was like, I'm mad at the president. Well, I can't do anything about the freaking president. I mean, like, you can't do anything about that stuff, but you can do stuff about things that are happening right in your own town. You can show up to that MPC meeting. You can show up to that zoning board meeting. You can write letters to people that will actually respond to you because they're your aldermen and they represent you. You can do that here, which you can't, which didn't even conceive of that before, And I think that's it. All it takes is finding one thing. I know I had this friend too, Heather Farrow, who after the election, she was really upset and she wanted to do one thing, and she decided that she found veganism was her passion. And so she doesn't, she's not standing on the front lines like protesting and doing all this stuff, but she advocates for veganism all the time. She found one thing and she is stuck with it. It's been a long time since the election now. A lot of people said a lot of things and didn't stick with them, but she stuck with the one thing she felt passionately about, and that was the care of animals. And I think that, that's all it took, was her finding that one thing that she could be passionate about and continue with. So that's what I would recommend, is if you want to do something, find something that you're passionate about, that one thing. It doesn't have to be a huge thing, but you can make a difference with a small thing.
You agree?
I definitely agree. And what he's saying is actually the theme of my new project I'm working on. It's called My Greatest Contribution. Every single person in this room, in the city, in the world, has a purpose. They have something to contribute to the world, and it's connect to your passion. And my advice to anyone out there who wants to do something do it. Especially if you care about it and you love it. I understand sometimes you're afraid and you're not sure how people are going to perceive it. It doesn't matter because they're going to talk about you. If you do it, they're going to talk about you if you don't do it. And I always, yeah, right?
You got that right.
And I always tell people this all the time. It is 7 billion people on the planet. 7 billion people on the planet. You cannot tell me at least 1 million of that 7 billion don't want to hear what you got to say or want to experience your product or whatever it may be. You cannot tell me that. So go for it, man.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on a couple of these. I strongly believe the most important work is local, and I use the word spectacle intentionally because there's a shock and awe campaign going on that's powerfully distracting. And the reason we are where we are in part is because locally we've been dropping the ball in terms of taking care of people and making sure that we have structures in place to take care of people. And I agree with him when he's talking about like going to these little meetings that nobody wants to go to. That's where the work of taking care of our community is done. And it also happens in formal ways. So I always encourage people who are like, there's so much chaos in the world, what should I do? Like, talk to your neighbor and listen. Talk to your neighbor and listen. And the other thing I would say is, I talk to national funders all the time to try to convince them to give me money. And they all want to fund the South, and they're all kind of abandoning the South at the same time. And because they don't know what to do here because there's no obvious win. Because there's no policy that might get passed in the next 8 months that might help undocumented immigrants and on and on and on. And I say you guys need to start thinking about what a win looks like in the South. It looks very different than it does in New York City or in Massachusetts or Chicago. And a lot of the work here is transformational. It's about creating spaces where people who think in binary ways come together and see how complicated these issues are, and start to have the hard conversations that we need to have about taking care of our business and taking care of our community. And art and cultural practices are one of the best ways to have those conversations. Like at Deep, when all that stuff with the anti-immigrant actions were happening at the federal level, we created this creative writing potluck. We had our youth ask their parents to bring in a favorite family recipe that carried a story. So the parents came in, and other adults and community chefs came in, and they laid their food out, their dishes on a table with the ingredients, and they had facilitated conversations about what those ingredients were and where they came from and why they were important to their families. And while they were eating and sharing about who they were, they very naturally started talking about the migration patterns of their families and how they got here. And they were finding all this commonality around migration and immigration, whether by bondage or by choice. And they didn't even know they were having like one of the hardest conversations in the nation. And that happened because we put culture at the center of that conversation.
Food.
Yeah.
Food.
Yeah. Food and music.
Food is great.
Food and music. Yeah. If you center that in the room, amazing things happen.
True.
Yeah.
All right. Well, got some really good stuff going here. I like this. So, Terry, you're just gonna be my first person again. I'm going down. Now we're going to drill down a little bit individually. These are some questions that when I was reading everybody's bio and I was thinking about what everybody was coming here tonight to see, I wanted to really talk to the individual. And Derry, you talked about immigration and violence, two of the things that are huge impacts on the kids you deal with every day. Talk about some other issues that kids are dealing with right now. I mean, really talk like, right now, my daughter's upset because she couldn't go to the mall tonight, and I just, it's just, it's like privilege for her, and she doesn't have to deal with those things. So tell me about that. Tell me, because my daughter goes to Savannah Arts Academy. You said Crystal goes to East Broad. You've got one of the best high schools in the country almost,
yep.
And it really struck me what you just said. So you probably see a lot of different kids. What are some of the other issues they're dealing with right now, and how has the art helped them? How has the art of writing helped them?
Well, there's a lot of compound daily trauma involved with growing up poor in Savannah. In addition to growing up, 12, which is its own challenge. And so there is a lot of trauma related to the uncertainties of life when you live below the poverty line. There's a lot of gun violence in Savannah. I've already talked about the way the media talks about our young people and how youth internalize those stories. The girls in our program write a lot about the sexual violence that they encounter. I have to say, because I know that I'm being like a real bummer tonight, making sure that everybody in the room understands like what it is to grow up in Savannah for a lot of the kids. But I also have to say one of the main things we try to do in DEEP is give them joyful spaces to counter what they encounter day in and day out. And joy and play is one of our most important tools in how we approach young people. And how we get them to engage with language in a way that will naturally build their literacy because they stop paying attention to it because they just love it so much that they're writing. So I had to say that. And we get a lot of writing that's about joy, but we get a lot of writing that's about them. So there's this really great academic called Patrick Kamanjian who writes about the trauma of growing up poor in low-income communities. And he says that the job of teachers and teaching artists, like the people that we have at DEEP, is to help. He says that young people growing up poor see themselves as the victims of fractured narratives. And that it's the job of educators and teaching artists to apprentice young people, see if I can get this exactly right, to apprentice young people to build coherent narratives of hope. So when a young woman like Nay, who has experienced all kinds of violence and has seen family members experience the harms of the structural violence that they bump up against day in and day out, when she writes a poem like that, where she's talking not only about her personal experience, but also the structures and the history of this harm, she is building comprehension and power because she's pulling back the curtains and she understands what she's going through. So she's less likely to see herself as a victim and more likely to see herself as a superhero and somebody who knows how to speak truth to power and maybe dismantle some of the stuff that's harming her. And she's 16. So that's some of the stuff that our young people get.
In a nutshell. I'm going to put him on the spot because he's right there on the left. When you get new kids in the program, is it before you can break that barrier and just get them to like let the words flow? Is it hard to build trust? I mean, do they take a while to, and then do they end up seeing you and your other people like parent figures and
mentors?
Mentors.
Totally. We talk a lot about how we do something we call mentoring in the margins, where we comment on their writing every time they write something down, which is not something that teachers have the time to do usually, to their great regret. And it's one of the reasons why teachers really like us. And what happens when you ask a young person to write about who they are and what they're going through, they write these really intense things on the page that they would never tell you face to face. And when that happens, you get the chance to respond in these really interesting ways where you find yourself helping them become better writers while you're also mentoring them as young people. And you have these really amazing conversations that happen in the margins where trust is built and young people discover who they are, in the writing that they might not have that this happens all the time. Kids have epiphanies about who they are while they're writing because they never had a safe space where they could explore that. And it happens at DEEP all the time. So yeah, lots of mentoring.
I'm a little jealous of that. That's got to be a powerful thing. All right, Nichole, I'm going to switch gears a little bit here. We talked about this earlier. I want to ask you about the physical keeping of art, the actual four walls of the building. We talked about earlier, with social media, with the internet. I don't have to go to Paris to see great art. I can just do that. I don't have to, I don't even have to leave my house anymore. What is that like it's still got to be great to put together something where people walk in, like we said, and see that. But what has that struggle been like? I mean, do you hear about people are like, why do we need museums? And why do we need museums? They probably didn't do that like I just did, but
maybe, I don't know. You know, about an hour before, and I've been in my current position for over 3 years now. We put on between 8 and 10 exhibitions a year. But still, before every single opening reception, about an hour before, I always sit there in my office and go, is anybody going to show up? Is anybody going to be here? Because we do have an incredible rise of opportunities to see art online. We've got the Google Art Project. A lot of major museums have their collections in searchable digital databases now. It's a big question in the arts and museum community right now, is whether or not the brick and mortar museum space or gallery space is still relevant. Spoiler alert, my answer is yes. I'll give you that. I'll give you that much right now. You know, I don't think there's much that can compare to the authentic experience of seeing an actual object in person. You know, I think about this just in comparison to the experience outside looking at Rob's works. You know, I've seen Rob's work. I'm from 5 hours away, and I've seen some of Rob's work in person, but this is the largest grouping of original work that I've seen in one space. And you know, I was having a conversation with some of you out there, and I heard other conversations of people standing in front of the works and just looking and looking closer and really getting up close and recognizing the intense amount of patience, of technicality, of diligence that goes into each one of those pieces that's hand created. And that's something that, while the pieces are represented beautifully online, you don't get that. That doesn't quite jump out at you through the screen the way it does in person. Sitting there and looking at every single individual detail that's been hand done, and that just blows me away. And that's, you know, on this scale, we obviously can talk on a larger scale about objects from 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, being in the same room with those, and the opportunity for people to start to build connections across time and across space with these objects. You know, so we have a permanent art collection at Brenau that really runs the gamut in terms of pieces regarding media, subject matter, time period. But just one example is a few weeks ago, I was able to work with one of our faculty members in her beginning art history class, so mostly freshmen, students who might not necessarily have engaged with the course material in other ways, but we were able to pull 10 pieces of pre-Columbian artifacts that we have in the collection, brought them into the students, into this room, and they, you know, thought they were doing formal analysis on these works. They didn't realize they were seeing them in person. They walk into the room, and you see some sort of, you know, disinterested people kind of, oh, what's that on the table? And then you hand them the white gloves, and you tell them they get to pick up this artifact from 500, 1,000, 5,000 years ago, and they get to hold it, and they get to move it, and they get to turn it, and they get to actually examine it. And you know, the surface details, indentions in the pots, pieces that have been sort of replaced, removed, those are things that you don't see on the screen or in your textbook. And those students left so much more excited than they walked in, because they each got to select a piece, they got to hold it, they got to take ownership over that thing. And that's what is happening in museums. I think museums have become, are becoming, or should be becoming more than just repositories for objects. You know, they should not be any longer places where you go to see a pristine object behind glass. You know, we need to have that interactivity. We need to be engaging people to come in from the community. I actually have seen recently there's a big movement, actually there are t-shirts that are made, museums are not neutral. And I think that ties back into that earlier conversation about activism in the space, because you know, we have to make sure that we're engaging the community in areas where it hits home, and providing safe spaces for conversation, for creativity, for dialogue, as you mentioned, Dare, for play and curiosity in children with children's programming. So there are a lot of ways that museums are approaching that, but there are a lot of places where they need to continue pushing that. But I think that there's hope. But as I said, I think there's nothing that replaces that excitement and that authenticity of experience that objects in a museum can provide, but we just need to keep pushing those lines and those boundaries.
One of my favorite things to do when I go to a museum is after the initial awe of everything I see, I like to people watch. I like to see how people, the discussions they have, like you said, how close they get. And it was funny that you were saying people, the white gloves touch, right? And I was about to go, if it were me, it would be and drop. I just think, like, oh goodness. So yeah, when you said you let people touch things, I was like, whoa, I need to stay out of that museum. So
well, that's a little bit of the difference between us too, and say going to the High Museum or the Met, because we are a gallery within a university. A lot of the purpose of our collection is really for teaching and education, and we try and bridge that gap a little bit. And there are a lot of museums that are beginning to have research collections and interactive collections where people can come in and touch and play and really examine up close. I've gotten yelled at by security guards before for being too close to a painting, so I understand the temptation. But I think it's a burgeoning field, and I think that that's sort of where we're going to see a little bit of the trends continuing to move.
I just wanted to kind of follow up with what Nichole said, and I think that what I love hearing that, and I never even considered something like that, but it's like, I think one of the things is a lot of people just feel intimidated to go into the museum.
Right.
And that's what you're talking about, the people watching is like, but once people start to feel comfortable and they're like, oh wait, I'm allowed to make my own interpretation. I'm allowed to look at this work the way I want to, not the way that I'm told I'm supposed to, or using the jargon or language that is supposed to be used for that. It's like, after a little while, they kind of become free of all of that background stuff. And once they're in, then they'll find the love for the work, which I think is, and being able to handle stuff. I mean, I had when I was in school, I was actually doing sculpture, and my sculpture teachers would tell me to go into the museums and touch the sculptures, like in the museums.
Just don't get caught.
Yeah, don't get caught. They would say go touch the sculptures, and they're like, if it's any sculpture that's worth its salt, you should be able to touch it, and it won't hurt. You won't hurt it.
Did you ever get busted?
Yeah, of course. Because the people are walking around looking for people like me touching the sculptures. You know what I mean? But there is something about that, though. It's like it feels like you're putting your hand where the sculptor put their hand, and you're becoming a part of you're in a part of their process when you do that, and you don't get to do that otherwise. I mean, when there's the barrier between the two. And it's funny too, because I was out there talking with people before this, and people are asking me, well, like, what's going on here? And my first response is always, well, what do you think's going on here? I want you to just, if you come in and you look at a piece and there's something there for you and you're having an experience with it, and it's giving you some sort of joy, or it's making you think, or whatever it might be, starting a conversation between you and someone that's next to you, I don't care what I intended for it. That's what, I mean, go. Do it, and then we can talk about what I had intended, but it's not like you're wrong because you didn't know what I meant by it when you're looking at it. So
that's actually a nice gift to give. It is. It's a nice gift to give people.
Well, that is. I think that's a huge thing. Is that intimidation factor? As we were talking about earlier, and so our exhibitions run the gamut. We have landscape paintings and still lifes one show, and then we have incredibly abstract, non-representational work the next show. And I have seen a lot of that, especially for these more maybe modern or abstract themed shows that we have. A lot of adults or a grown-up crowd will come in and sort of shrink back a little bit before really engaging with the work. But one of my favorite moments, I think, was an exhibition that we had last year. It was an artist from Columbus, and her work was very it was very abstract. She had some sculptural pieces, some installation pieces, very non-representational. We had a group of middle school students, 5th graders, who came in, and we really let them engage with the pieces. They walked around, they spent time, they each picked their favorite work, they wrote response papers on these pieces. But just hearing these kids talk about the works, they were pulling out so many threads that I never would have even imagined for them or for myself even. But just seeing their engagement, being able to walk up to this installation piece, walk around it, really, really get close, and then say, this reminds me of this experience that I had, and just be blown away by the just poignancy of what these kids were saying. And so I think that is maybe a skill that's lost a little bit as we as we sort of grow up and become a little bit more hesitant. But if we can, continue to push people to engage and to have those freeing moments, I think that's, what we're here for.
I want to go to climax. So your art, your music, you have, and I don't like to say used, but we'll say you used it to, impact younger people, really influence them and everything. Who are some of your influences? Who influenced you?
Oh man, my influences. Well, I have like subconscious and conscious influences. Like my subconscious influences, my mom, who's right there, by the way. She's a musician. She plays gospel music. She's been choir directors for like every church we're a member of that I can remember. And just hearing her practice in the house like constantly, it made an impression on me. And my father, the different music catalog he has for different genres of music, it also helped broaden my mind subconsciously. But consciously, some of my influences now are like Andre 3000, Will Smith, Jay-Z, those people, the greats, people that I can get something from.
Is it just their music, or is it the way they live their
Yes,
lives?
the way
all of it?
Most definitely the way they live their lives, especially like Will Smith, for him doing what he did, music, like making clean music that that transcended to all different types of people, and then him switching over to doing acting and being just as successful, if not more successful, is like big because I act as well. And Jay-Z, his business sense, his mindset, like having ownership of his music, having ownership of his art, and an industry where they try to drain you from everything you're worth. And Andre 3000, with his creativity, his teamwork, what he did with Outkast, with Big Boy, and he's not afraid to be different and bold in his poetry, his writing styles, the way he uses his voice as an instrument. It's yeah.
Now, Big Boy is from Savannah, right?
Yeah, he is.
Why is Savannah not celebrating Big Boy? Like that's why has he not been coming to town in Savannah?
He comes every once in a while.
I know, but he
yeah.
should be being celebrated
That's what I said.
as a son of Savannah. It amazes me that Savannah doesn't like
embrace that.
Yeah.
Yeah, embrace him like
I mean, he's
that.
one of the greatest musicians of this point.
Maybe he'll come and speak at Deep Center. That'd be awesome.
That would be great.
Yeah, just make that happen. I'm sure he'll be right over
Well,
there.
We'll all
be
be there.
You guys be on the morning show, so maybe I can go ahead and put in a
there
good
you
word.
go.
Yeah, it's So. All right, Rob, you talked about becoming more vocally social active recently and things like that. But growing up, do you feel that it's always been there? You know that you've always had those feelings. It's just, do you figure that influenced your art, or do you think your art has now influenced your social activism?
I think now it's probably that the social activism is playing more of an impact. It's having more of an impact on the art than the other way around it. I think that before it was, I'd become interested in a subject matter, and then I would sort of do some research, and then I would get angry about it. Basically, is what would happen.
I don't see him as an angry person. You keep saying he's angry. I don't know.
Come visit me in my dark hole of the studio sometime. You'll see some my deep dark anger and resentments. But now I think I was telling that story of about Steve Vickery and his influence on me and getting involved in activism and stuff like that. And that whole process was incredibly frustrating. So when we were, I'll relate this sort of to how it impacted my artwork. So the process of, we were fighting this storage facility and trying to save this green space, and that started, I think it was in February of March of last year, and I think that we finished those. People in the crowd probably know a little better than me, but it's like April or May. But the point is that the experience was very frustrating and eye-opening, and I would go to these meetings, and it was like, how could these people think that this is a good idea, right? That's how I would feel. It's like, this is a horrible structure. This doesn't have anything to do with Savannah. They're going to wipe out all this green space, and there's tons of environmental. And so, like I would see that, and then I'd be doing research on historical buildings that are getting like ripped down in Savannah, and then I would do art pieces about it, and then I would see, I'd like, you know, go by the lot where they've now plowed over everything in there, where they're building the storage facility, and there's be all these trees and stuff, and I'm like, they're gonna destroy this big forest that's there, you know, and I would be working on an environmental piece, and so basically, I mean, to be honest with you, I get involved in this activism, and then I feel like there's injustice, and I feel like resentful towards these who are making these horrible decisions for our city, and then it makes me want to make artwork about those subject matter, and then of course, like, then I make the piece, I do more research and I learn more, and then that makes me want to get involved in another thing that's involved in Savannah. So it's kind of become a cycle at this point, but I definitely feel like the activism stuff really, I mean, it lights a fire for me I mean, I was like, you know, stuff like that happens, and I'm just like, the images appear before me, and I'm just like, I'm ready to go sit down in my angry hole and do my drawings. So
I'm just going to put him on the spot right now. Are we going to see Alderman Rob soon?
Oh, hell no. Hell no. No way. No, I got some people that I would really like to run, and that I will do
we'll see
everything,
campaign manager
everything
Rob.
I can help to do. But I mean, honestly, I just get too frustrated. I can't. It's hard for me to keep my cool with these people. You know, I think that it's my place is as an artist and making as much of an impact as I can on the city through my artworks and through events like this, and trying to bring people together who are involved in organizations and businesses and things that I think are really having a positive impact on the community, and that we can all come together, and I feel like we can really make this city what I believe that it can be. And I feel like that's my role. And let other people, you know, they can go sit up on the city council, and I will be happy to support the right people. So.
Well, those are the questions that I had for everybody. I mean, does anyone on the panel want to bring anything up before we take some questions from the audience? Come on, Derry. You just got.
I want to know if Rob ever lets visitors visit him in his angry hole.
In his angry hole? You could get one of Drew's GoPros and just have like a
funny.
stream.
So
I was a couch in there.
I was meeting with people from the Jepson Center at Tel Fair, Stephanie at Art 912, and Rachel. Or I was reading with Rachel Reese, and she was like, "Oh, you know, we should do a studio visit." And I'm thinking, like, I don't know if you want to come to that place, that dark place, you know. But
so you
I
have
don't do
this
a lot
dark
of studio
place, and you create these beautiful pictures that are kind of light, even though some of the meaning. I find that fascinating because I can't draw a straight line. I can't carry a tune. I can't, you know. It's just. I love being here with creative people and learning the process. I can't write a word or two. I'm not deep, I don't think, but I do like to write. So this fascinates me. So, all right. Anybody want to talk about anything else? If we do take some questions from the audience, my friend Drew, who's recording this, has asked that I repeat the question so that we can have it on camera. So if I do that, I don't want you to think I'm just being rude or whatever. So does anyone have any questions? Questions over here?
My question is kind of multifaceted and is directed towards you and kind of hip hop within Savannah. And you had brought up the point of, you know, not as many people know that Big Boy is from Savannah, and obviously on their first album writes a beautiful song called West Savannah, which is maybe lyrically one of his strongest, you know, efforts. But that being said, as a hip hop artist in Savannah, you know, how do you feel that, you know, members, you know, of Outkast don't have a bigger presence in town? You know, groups such as Goody Mob aren't doing things to help progress the city and the, you know, the music culture in Savannah after they've had so much success.
Okay.
I don't think I have to parrot that one. I think we all heard that. That was a really good question.
Yeah, from my understanding, a reason why a lot of people don't rally behind like Big Boy and Outkast, well, more so Big Boy, is because like we don't really see him, and we don't really know what he's doing for us. He gave us a shout out on a song, but he's repping Atlanta way harder. He's there in that community doing stuff for those people, but we almost feel left out in a sense. So people kind of feel some kind of resentment for that.
Does he still have people here? Does he have family here?
Yeah, he still does have family here. But like I said, it's like we don't see it, so we don't necessarily. If he is doing something, it's not anything that we would know because we don't see him. His presence isn't felt here because he's not physically here. He doesn't physically come and show love. Like, hey, what's up, Savannah? I'm doing this for this at this park. Or I'm doing this. You know, it's just not like that.
I'm going to do some closing comments if you want to.
You're going to let me do some closing comments. Well, you're the moderator here.
I'm telling you, this has been great. This is my first time moderating a panel like this. I did my research and everything, so I hope I asked some pretty, interesting questions. Are you guys going to be outside again?
Yeah, we'll be outside. One thing I will, I guess, close up with is that, there was a lot of, and I kind of came out here really quickly and listed off all the organizations that were a part of this. But the reality is that there's a lot of people sitting in this room, a lot of people that supported that community bag. And those weren't randomly selected. I went to those people, I reached out to them, and although they were from many different backgrounds and they had different passions from the Savannah Bicycle Campaign, Healthy Savannah, people like that, Smart Growth Savannah, Savannah Veggies and Vegans, obviously they helped curate the food, to Auspicious Bakery, to Doghouse Studios, all these different organizations. The one thing that was consistent when I met with these people, we are on the same wavelength. We have different passions and different ideas, but we're all moving in the same direction. So what I really do encourage you is that with these bags, they introduce you to a lot of these organizations. Maybe you know some of them, maybe you don't, but all of these people want to hear from you. Reach out to them. If you feel like this is something that you believe in or that you can support, I'm not even talking about financially. I'm talking about if you just think that this is a good idea and they're doing something valuable, reach out to them because they are really approachable and really great people. I sat down and met with every one of them, and they were amazing people that inspired me when I sat down and talked to them. And so, do what I did and reach out to them, and I promise you that they will respond. And I think that it'll make your life better, actually, to be involved with these people, in all seriousness. So,
Can I say like a teensy-weensy thing?
Sure.
I imagine everybody in this room already knows this, but at the federal level and the local level, the politicians are talking about defunding the arts. Yeah. There is, from what I can tell, it's unlikely that that our president and his gang would be able to erase the NEA like they're saying they want to do, because it takes an act of Congress. And there are enough conservative legislators who get it that it would probably be really hard to erase the NEA, but they probably will cut a lot of the budgets. Deep between the money that we directly get and is leveraged by the money that we get, our budget would probably drop by about 30%. This is money that's going directly to low-income communities in Savannah. So if you don't think that impacts you, you're wrong. And the other thing is, as importantly, when you're talking about what's the thing to do in Savannah, what's the next right thing right in front of me in Savannah, a lot of the city council and our city manager are talking about defunding the arts and social services in Savannah. So if you care about the arts and social services, tell them. Tell them that it's not just a thing you visit in the gallery, but it's the water that we swim in. It's the food that we eat. It's our families. It's our music. It's our poetry. And when we talk about developing communities in healthy ways, culture is community. That's what it is first. Sidewalks, they come after culture. So that's my pitch for doing that. Call your alderman and your mayor and your city manager.
Oh, hey, I'm sorry.
Can you give us a little bit? Can you give us a little something, Clay? Let's give him a little love.
All right. I give y'all a little piece of a song I wrote called Savannah Weather. I have CDs if anyone's interested. Just take donations. If you have $1, I won't get offended as long as you want to listen to it. But this is the actual song called Savannah Weather. I do like the verse and the hook for you. The verse goes like this. So this is what it feels like when you get tackled by real life. When you be skating on thin ice, that's the reason I pen right. My kin life crazy. My sister got a baby the same age I am. My niece is filled with hatred because parents was not there. She live in a nightmare. She a damsel in distress, except it ain't no night here. It's a shame, 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 shame. When you can't even call that home, you can't even call that home, even when you call that home. And it's a shame, 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 shame. When you can't even call their phone, you can't even call their phone, even when there's something wrong. Savannah.
Woo!